Hello and a very warm welcome to you. This is the Courthouse, our law class 101, where we get to learn the law together in plain, simple and entertaining language. Yes, we go into jargons as well, just to entertain you and be focused on letting you know the nitty-gritty of the law. I am Itohan Olomu-Agbodo. Once again, you're welcome. After this break, we'll tell you what we'll be discussing this week.
From Lagos
to London, from Johannesburg
For several years, our economy
to the United States,
identifying houses of worship.
we have all the world covered for you, no matter where you are.
Love with News is at the heart of it all.
Have experience.
We bring you our perspectives of stories behind the story.
The signs given to us for the entry of these things are before us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us on this station.
You're welcome back. This is the Courthouse, your law class 101, and this week on the show we are looking at an aspect of commercial law that has to do with real estate and how do you conclude real estate transaction. As usual, we are joined by a distinguished legal practitioner who will be giving us all the information that we need to know about real estate transactions and how to legally conclude a real estate transaction, and he's none other than Lekan Ikuomola. You're welcome to the Courthouse.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and well, Lekan is here for the first time on the show, and he is a specialist in the area of commercial law and real estate and property law generally. So this week, we want you to tell us generally what are real estate transactions about. We know they have to do with property, they have to do with lands or houses. Just give us, is there any legal definition for a real estate transaction?
Oh, well, of course, there are legal definitions for every terminology in law. Real estate, really, as you said, they are buildings, lands, and anything attached to the surface of the earth.
Land, yeah.
That's basically what it's all about. There's the same meaning that you have for it in law is the same that plain English definition. That's what it is.
Okay, and we are in the business of speaking plainly here. So what do we need to know if we want to go into a real estate transaction? What are the first basic steps or basic tips that everyone have to have at the tips of their fingers?
Okay, before going into that, one thing everybody needs to know is that as a citizen of the country, as a Nigerian, you are guaranteed the right to own property anywhere in the country. Be it in the north, in the south, in the east. So it's guaranteed by the Constitution. So that is the beginning.
Okay.
So nobody can say, oh, you cannot come into Ondo State to come and own property, or you cannot go to Borno State to go and acquire property. It is guaranteed by the Constitution. So secondly as well, even though you can acquire real estate property for yourself, it's however subject to the provisions of the Land Use Act. Now, the Land Use Act on its own has vested all lands in a state, in the governor of that state. So the governor acts more like a trustee on behalf of the people. So if you want to acquire land, you will need the consent of the governor before you can acquire property in any state.
You've just made reference to the Land Use Act, and that's Act is as old as 1978.
Yes, you're correct.
And a lot of people are shouting that it basically extends, it has outlived its usefulness. Because you mentioned that, what's your thoughts on the Land Use Act?
Yes, the Land Use Act has been in, that's almost 40 years now. And that's a problem that's not only common to the Land Use Act on its own, it's also common to other laws that we have in Nigeria. Unfortunately, the Land Use Act is not like any other typical law that you can just amend normally. You still have to go through the way you can amend or amend the Land Use Act to reflect current realities, it's the same way you amend the Constitution. So it's a very rigorous process. And until we get to that stage, we can only make do with what we have now, which is the Land Use Act.
Okay, now let's going back to our discussion on real estate and acquiring a property. Are there laws regulating the real estates apart from the Land Use Act, which you mentioned? Generally, I, as an individual, I have met with an agent that has a property to sell to me. Do we need to be guided by any form of law? Is there any form of contract or any form of agreement generally that should guide us before we get into that transaction?
Okay, the starting point is still the Land Use Act, which we've mentioned. And every state has its own laws that regulate transactions like this. In Lagos State, we have, for instance, the Land Registration Law of Lagos State. But having said that, because real estate transactions are contractual transactions between parties, so the law that will regulate that transaction will be the agreement between the parties. So in that case, if I have identified a property that I am interested in acquiring, all I have to do is to agree to come up with if I identify the property, parties have negotiated how much it is to be paid for the property. All what we have to do is to come up with the contract of sale, the deed of assignment, as the case may be. The contract of sale and deed of assignment constitute the law that will bind the parties, the seller and the buyer to that transaction.
Okay, so the contract of sale and deed of assignment.
Yes.
What is supposed to be like the major clauses in that contract of sale for this real estate transaction?
Okay, the contract of sale more or less it's a purchase. It evidences a purchase that value has exchanged, that money has exchanged hands from the buyer to the seller. Now, and the deed of assignment is the instrument that transfers the interest of that of the seller to the buyer. So what is transferring? And you have to know that by virtue of the Land Use Act, even if when you want to acquire property, interest in property, the interest you are acquiring is not for life. It's subject to the provisions of the Land Use Act that says you can only get 99 years.
Yes, lease.
So 99 years lease, no longer freehold. So if, for instance, I'm buying from you, a seller, what I'm acquiring is the unexpired residue of that 99 years. Say, the person who is selling has obtained the C of O in 1980 and has been there till 2020. That's about 30 years. And if I'm buying today, I'll be buying the interest that covers the remaining 69 years. So that is that.
That's quite interesting. Now, you've talked about the contract of sale and the deed of assignment, and you mentioned the fact that we have 99 years officially from the Land Use Act, the provisions of the Land Use Act. How do I know, as a seller of the land, probably I inherited this property from my grandfather, from one generation to the other, it has passed maybe like several generations. How do I know that I have only like 20 years remaining, and how does the buyer know? Is this not a problem in the eye of the law and generally the society at large?
To answer your question, if now you've inherited properties from your
great-grandfather and all that,
it depends. If, for instance, the title has been your grandfathers and your ancestors have been occupying the land from time immemorial, let's say pre-1978,
yes,
all the family ought to have done since 1978 was to apply to the government for a C of O, a certificate of occupancy. Where they have not done that, and I am acquiring, or I go to the family, I like your land, I want to buy it, we negotiate, and we agreed on the fees. The family will still sell to me, but it now behoves on me to now approach the government to process a C of O over that property, because strictly speaking, what they've transferred to me is still subject to the consent of the governor.
So I'll not be the one going to try to obtain the governor's consent at that point.
The buyer will now be the one in practice to obtain the governor's consent. So what happens is this: you've paid, you at the point where parties are executing the document, all you have to do is ensure that your Form 1C, you get that as well. The families are the representatives of the family, the family head and the principal members execute the Form 1C, saying that, oh, they have transferred their interest in their family land to you. And it is that Form 1C alongside the deed of assignments and other necessary documents and their passports, IDs that you take to the lands registry in Alausa here in Lagos, for example, with which you use to process your C of O and to register your title on that property.
You know, we try to make it as plain as possible. You talked about Form 1C. What is Form 1C about? Form
1C is an, how do I put it? It's an instrument from the government. It's a form, a pre-prepared form from the government that the seller and the buyer are to complete. It shows that a transaction has taken place over a piece of property, that there has been an exchange, one has acquired. So it's saying, I am no longer the owner of this property and take this as my, that I have transferred to this person.
So like transfer of title.
It is not the instrument of transfer, but it is
like an application for
exactly application together with the other document which parties are signed that you take to the lands registry to register your title.
I think this is one of the major challenges we have, and we see land matters staying in court for ages because of this transfer of title. Who transferred what title? When did the title get transferred? Was it properly transferred? And things like that. Now, you're talking about all these other forms and instruments that need to be signed and taken to the lands registry. Where does the issue of survey come in terms of real estate transactions?
Okay, so at the point where you've identified the land you want to buy, you always advisable to go for inspection, not just by phone call, oh, I've seen the land, let's go ahead. You go for inspection. At the point where you're going for inspection, if you like what you see and you're interested in buying and you're negotiating, you request for the title documents that the owners have over the property. They could have a C of O. If they don't have a C of O, is it governor's consent, as well as a survey plan. Now, it's also advisable that when you are going to inspect and you have agreed in principle to go ahead with the transaction, you go along with your own surveyor. Your surveyor is the one who would confirm that the boundaries and the boundaries of the property you are about to buy corresponds with the survey plan of the seller. So now, how does he do that? You give him the copy of the survey plan that you have been given. He goes to the Surveyor General's office. Before then, he must have picked the coordinates on the land. Then he takes it to the Surveyor General's office. They compare and they say that it's the same land. Then he comes back to you and say, oh, yes, it is the same land. The coordinates match the survey plan that have been given. So that's where then he now goes ahead to prepare your own survey for you, either at the time before, at the time or after you must have consummated the purchase, the transaction.
Well, if you finish the transaction, you've concluded the transaction and you discover that the survey plan you were given by the seller doesn't correspond with what your own surveyor, that's a buyer surveyor, comes out with, probably it now ends up being smaller. What happens then? What
must have happened is that you've not done what you should have done before then.
Which was the inspection.
The inspection, and your surveyor should have taken the coordinates of the land. He goes to site with you, he takes the coordinates, then he goes ahead to do his own due diligence at the Surveyor General's office. At that point, he now informs you it has been done. But if you do not do that, then there is an issue. You might have to now go back to the family to tell them, or whoever you've bought from, to say, oh, what you've given me. So if you haven't paid fully or completely, then you might have a leeway to negotiate and get the proper, for them to identify that this is the property we are selling to you or not. But if you have paid, it might be difficult. What you may do is to engage the family proper. And if they are being, if they are misrepresented to you, if the property is, what's the word? it's encroaching on another person's property, you may have to you look for alternatives to either sue for damages as a result of misrepresentation and other factors
as
yes.
well. Quite interesting. We've been listening to Lekan Ikuomola, a legal practitioner who focuses majorly on commercial transactions and property and real estate law. We'll take a report, and when we return, we'll be taking a look at what really you need to do legally to conclude your real estate transactions. Stay with us.
Real estate is one of the worst sectors to be defrauded in because it involves mostly large-ticket transactions. Unfortunately, dubious and cunning people are everywhere. If you won't get familiar with many things, you should with common red flags in real estate transactions. Knowledge about what to watch out for to avoid being defrauded is therefore paramount in real estate transactions and dealings. Try to thoroughly investigate and be sure that you're not going to be duped. An honest transaction does not involve all of that rush and pressure. So if there is a rush for payment or pressure, take note, that is a red flag. When anyone is initiating a real estate transaction with you, be careful of bogus and exaggerated claims. Some people are sweet-mouthed and deceptive. They can convince you to take on a transaction that would not only hurt you financially, but emotionally. So watch out for these things and stop to think before making a decision. For large real estate transactions especially, you need the services of a lawyer. When a real estate agent insists on not having a lawyer involved, be assured that this is a red flag in that real estate transaction. They tell you that you have everything sorted out and so you really don't have to worry. Then you really have to worry. If you will skip other processes involved to secure a land or get a new home, don't miss the step where you should actually go and physically see the site. Fraudulent people play very smart, and that is because they have been in this for a very long time. They keep on delaying, postponing, and eventually denying you of the opportunity to get to see where you will be investing your money. You need to be patient in real estate transactions. Take your time. You can tell them that you can afford to wait until they are ready to show you what you're about to buy. Refusal to offer an evidence of payment is also a red flag. Before it becomes too late, insist until you get a receipt. This is most common with renting apartments and hostels. A dubious agent will keep on stalling until you forget. Don't fall for that trap. You might have already paid to this particular scammer, which is probably not your fault. Demand a receipt and quickly take it up if it is becoming an issue. In summary, real estate transactions need that you be patient and do your due diligence well. Allow for human error and mistakes, but not too big that they scream for your withdrawal. Do not be afraid to put anything on hold. You are not going to lose the best deal. That is what they tell you. They say you should hurry because it's going to slip off your fingers. You will always find other reasonably good deals. So watch out in real estate transactions. Be very vigilant.
You're welcome back. We still have Ikuomola Lekan here, a legal practitioner, and he's been talking about all that you need to know about real estate transactions. So now we're taking a look proper into how to conclude. Now we know the basic things we should do. How do we now conclude legally a transaction, a real estate transaction? Because sometimes we even hear that, okay, when you respond to that question, then we'll ask you, there's a viewer that sent in a question now that's quite interesting that we would like you to respond to. So how do we legally conclude a real estate transaction?
Concluding a real estate transaction is it involves stages. And we've mentioned some of those stages. Yes. You identify the land, you go for inspection, your surveyor takes the coordinates
and all that.
Then you have to go to the land registry. If, for instance, you've requested for a document, the document you are given is a COO or a registered deed. You go to the land registry to confirm that the title of the seller is genuine. There's no defect in title. They own what they say they own. And if the property probably is is not covered by any of those two, but maybe it was inherited, you may have to go to the High Court, the registry, the probate registry, to be sure that, oh, the letters of administration or the wills, actually the property is part of what was willed to the person who is selling.
Yeah.
And in some other cases, you might need to just engage people around the neighborhood to be sure. Also, it may be necessary for you to also conduct an independent valuation of the property yourself. The reason for this is to guide your negotiation, really. So you could, at the point of carrying out your own independent valuation, let's say the seller tells you, I want 50 million for this property. The valuation comes out and it says, oh, it's 40 million. At that point, you know where your negotiation. But if the valuation comes out and probably the property is worth 100 million, then there might be need to exercise caution.
Yes.
Oh, why is this person selling
at such a low rate?
So you may need to engage the agent of the buyer as well as the buyer, of the seller rather, as well as the seller, to know why are you selling at this, oh, is it a distress sale? Are you in need of cash? Are you leaving the country at the moment? So all that.
Maybe the land is even subject to litigation.
Exactly. And also, I forgot to mention, Lagos State has an initiative where, as part of your due diligence, once you've collected those documents from the seller, copies of those, you can also conduct search through the Lagos State Lagos List Pendants online to know whether the property is free of litigation or not. Okay. Then, how do you conclude it? Parties always ensure that you are not just dealing with an agent, agent of the seller, whether or not he has the authority. Always make sure you see the buyer and to know that this person is the true buyer. Then at the point when you are satisfied with your due diligence, parties, usually the buyer's lawyers, will prepare the contract of sale and the deed of assignment. And then you must have seen the originals of the owner's title document. You see them, be sure they are genuine. If you haven't seen them, if they've not given you, do not make payments. And payment is advised to, at the point of signing, payment is advised to either by transfer or bank draft, never in cash.
Never in cash.
Never in cash is not advised.
So that you have records at least.
Exactly. So at the point when parties sign the deed of assignment, then the transaction between the parties has been consummated. However, what you get at that point is an equitable mortgage. An equitable interest title in the property. The reason why that is takes us back to the issue of the Land Use Act.
Yes, and the governor being
so the governor has to give consent to that transaction. Okay. So you now need to go and process your title, your equitable interest to become a legal interest for the governor to give. So until that point when the governor gives you consent to the transaction, your title is equitable, though concluded between the parties, but
still equitable.
It's still equitable.
Okay, so equitable interest and
legal interest.
Legal
title, yes.
Okay, but now monies have exchanged hands,
yes.
And in this part of the world, we hear you've paid, quickly start building. If you don't start building immediately, we're talking about an empty land now that was purchased. If you don't start building immediately or doing some work or one thing or the other, activities on the land, your land will be taken away from you. How often do you see that type of scenario play out in your daily transactions?
Well, it happens on a daily basis. Now, especially with the people popularly known as Omonile. Land grabbers.
In Lagos State, Southwest Nigeria. Mostly.
Yes. So typically what will happen with those kind of people, let's say you've acquired a land which up to a particular point was for this purpose virgin land from the family. Now what they do is they sell to different people at different times. So that's where the issue of your due diligence comes in. Now, if you've bought, yes, it is advisable immediately, if the property is gated, for instance, change the padlocks at that point so that you know you only have put your own security there, fence it if it's not fenced, and if you have the funds, immediately start construction. But if you, like you've mentioned, a lot of people just buy and let the property appreciate and leave it and go to sleep. Then you're living, it's like staying in your own house and leaving the gates and the doors wide open, ajar. Anything can happen in the middle of the night. Thieves can come unexpectedly. So, but what you can do in such situation is you could engage the family as the startup, engage the person who sold to you that, what's happening here? I bought from you. Then if the person is it's a person of good character, it would assist you to, okay, we'll put the necessary things in place to be sure that these people do not come back to encroach on your land. But if the person is of questionable character, you could now maybe want to escalate it to say you want to go to court, or before then, it's advised you could get the Lagos State government involved. There's a special task force on against land grabbers. So you could petition the AG's office, then they will take action and do the needful in order to protect your interests. Yeah. And if all that does not work, which rarely does happen, you may be forced to, depending on circumstances of the case, to sue the seller if he's involved, or sue unknown persons who are the omoniles, the land grabbers, and other people who are encroaching on your property. But because of our judicial system, litigation on real estate transactions have been known to be protracted and takes
so long a time.
So the reason why due diligence before consummating
purchase,
is very important.
So these are very, very salient points that you've brought to our attention. The fact that we need to do our due diligence in terms of carrying out inspection of the property that you want to purchase, making sure you know the history of that property. Yes. And in fact, your survey should be done probably by your own person to compare with that of the seller as well. And of course, you need to also, there's this list pendants situation you mentioned. List pendants is to find out about the pending cases in court. If the land you're interested in has any form of litigation or attachment or encumbrance, that's what they call them, encumbrance in court. So these are very, very important things to note when you're carrying out or you're trying to enter a real estate transaction. And our distinguished legal practitioner, Lekan Ikuomola, gave us this insight, real deep insight into real estate transactions. So at this point, we want to say a very big thank you for joining us this week on the Courthouse.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I
know this is your first time, but I've already said thank you, but I won't just let you go without getting one Latin maxim from you. We have our bar book segment. We share Latin maxims, we share their meanings. So what is your favorite Latin maxim? I know you may have a plethora of them. What is your Latin maxim for the week?
I don't have a favorite one, but because of the topic of discussion, I would say quis quid plantator solo sedit. So whatever attachment or anything that attaches to the land, whoever owns the land, owns every building, every structure, be it agriculture, trees, whatever that attaches to the land. Yes.
So quid plantator solo sedit, he who owns the land owns everything attached to the land. In fact, from the land to the high heavens. You get to find out more Latin maxims in our bar book segment. Stay with us. You're welcome back. Well, it is actually time for us to go. We want you to send your questions to us. We'll be having a very special episode. We'll be taking your questions alone with our legal experts. So keep sending your questions. You can visit our website on www.loverplus.tv. We would like you to also download our app with any of the mobile app stores, and it is Lover Plus. We would also like you to send your comments. I told you earlier, send comments, send questions. We are ready to take all of it. And you can use our hashtag Lover Plus, hashtag the courthouse. Ito and Olomu-Agbodo. You know, I always tell you not to get mad, but get a lawyer. Bye for now.